The avoidant has always controlled the dynamic through strategic withdrawal, through being the one who cares less, through maintaining enough distance that they could never be hurt more than the other person. This control has been their safety net, their guarantee that relationships happen on their terms, their insurance policy against the vulnerability that comes from needing someone who might leave. Every previous person who mattered eventually fell into the predictable pattern, pursuing when the avoidant withdrew, accommodating when the avoidant created distance, proving through their continued investment that the avoidant held the power in the dynamic. And then they encounter you. Not you performing strength or pretending indifference to manipulate them back, but you genuinely centered in your own worth, genuinely unbothered by their withdrawal, genuinely capable of existing completely without them regardless of how much the connection might have mattered. The avoidant deploys their usual tactics, creates distance expecting pursuit, goes cold expecting you to generate warmth, withdraws expecting you to bridge the gap. But you do none of these things. You simply continue existing in your own life, unbothered by their absence, unmoved by their tactics, completely self-sufficient in ways that do not require their validation or presence. The moment the avoidant realizes you are too strong to control through their usual mechanisms, something fundamental shifts in their psychology. They are confronted with a person who will not play the role their defensive system requires, who refuses to participate in the power dynamic that has always made relationships feel safe, who demonstrates through action that the avoidance withdrawal does not create the dependency and pursuit it has always created before. This confrontation triggers a cascade of psychological responses that reveal everything about how the avoidance patterns function and what happens when those patterns encounter someone who cannot be manipulated into enabling them. What follows is not the avoidant suddenly becoming healthy and pursuing you properly. What follows is the avoidance defensive system attempting increasingly desperate strategies to restore the control they lost, to make you react in ways that confirm their power, to force you back into the dynamic where they determine how much closeness happens and when. Understanding what happens in this moment, when the avoidant sees you are too strong to control, is essential for maintaining the boundaries that protect you from their patterns, and for recognizing that their response to your strength is not about your value, but about their need to maintain psychological mechanisms that have nothing to do with genuine connection and everything to do with managing their own terror of vulnerability. Number one, they escalate their withdrawal to force a reaction that confirms they still have power. The avoidant's first response to realizing you will not pursue or accommodate their patterns is to escalate the very behavior that should be pushing you away, hoping that more extreme withdrawal will finally trigger the reaction they need. Your pursuit, your anxiety, your demonstration that their absence affects you enough to make you chase. They create even more distance, become even colder, withdraw even more completely. The logic is not conscious, but it is clear. If small doses of unavailability do not make you pursue, perhaps absolute unavailability will reveal that you do actually need them, that your strength is performance that will crack under enough pressure. This escalation is the avoidant's attempt to restore the power dynamic they are comfortable with. They need evidence that they matter enough to you that their absence creates distress, that you are not actually as unbothered as you appear, that if they just withdraw thoroughly enough, you will eventually break and prove that they have the upper hand. The escalation is a test designed to force you to fail at the strength you are demonstrating, to reveal that beneath your composure is the same neediness and dependency that every previous person exhibited when faced with the avoidance distance. Subscribe to understand the psychological warfare that happens when avoidants lose the control they built their entire relational strategy around. But when you do not react to the escalation, when increased distance is met with continued strength and self-sufficiency, when their most extreme withdrawal generates no pursuit or anxiety or visible impact on your well-being, the avoidant is forced to confront that their primary tool for controlling relationship dynamics, has failed completely. The withdrawal that has always worked to maintain their power, to keep the other person in the pursuing position, to ensure they never have to risk being the vulnerable one, is not working with you. You are not chasing, not anxious, not demonstrating any of the responses their nervous system needs to feel safe. This failure of their most reliable control mechanism triggers profound psychological distress in the avoidant because it means they have no power over whether connection continues or ends. With previous people, the avoidant could withdraw, knowing the other person would maintain the connection despite the distance, could create space, knowing they could return when ready and be welcomed back. With you, withdrawal means actual loss of connection that you are completely comfortable with, space that you do not attempt to bridge, distance that you accept as final unless the avoidant does the vulnerable work of reaching back out to restore contact. The avoidant realizes they are in a relationship dynamic where they are not in control, where their usual tools for managing intimacy through strategic distance are ineffective, where your strength means they would have to actually show up consistently to maintain connection, rather than being able to disappear and return at will while you do all the work of keeping the relationship alive. This realization is terrifying, because the avoidant has never had to sustain intimacy through genuine presence, rather than through the other person's pursuit, despite their absence. What makes this particularly destabilizing for the avoidant is that they cannot blame you for their loss of control. You are not being manipulative or playing games. You are simply being genuinely strong and self-sufficient. You are not trying to make them feel powerless. You are demonstrating that their power was only ever granted by people willing to accommodate their patterns, and you are not one of those people. The avoidant cannot frame you as the problem, because the problem is that their usual defensive strategies do not work with someone who has actual boundaries and genuine self-worth. The escalation continues until the avoidant either accepts that their withdrawal will not restore their power with you, or they leave entirely, seeking someone else who will respond to their tactics in the familiar way that allows them to maintain control. Most avoidants choose to leave because facing that they cannot control the dynamic is more unbearable than losing the specific person who refused to be controlled. But occasionally, an avoidant will recognize that your strength is exactly what they need to finally confront their patterns, and they will choose the terrifying path of learning to exist in relationship without the control mechanisms that have always made intimacy feel manageable. Number 2, they attempt to provoke jealousy or create competition to restore their position of being pursued. When withdrawal fails to make you chase, the avoidant often shifts tactics to creating scenarios designed to trigger jealousy or insecurity that will force you to pursue them to secure the relationship. They mention other people who are interested in them, create ambiguity about their availability, strategically display interactions with others that could be interpreted as romantic interest. The goal is to activate your anxiety about losing them, to make you feel like you need to compete for their attention, to restore the dynamic where they are the pursued prize rather than the person who needs to work to maintain your interest. This tactic reveals the avoidant's fundamental belief that relationships are power struggles where one person holds value that the other must compete for, where connection is controlled by whoever cares less, where intimacy is dangerous unless you can ensure you are the one with more options and therefore more power. The avoidant cannot conceive of relationship as mutual exchange between equals, because that would require vulnerability they are not capable of risking. Instead, they need to maintain the position of being wanted more than they want, valued more than they value, pursued more than they pursue. But when you do not react to their attempts to create competition, when you are completely unbothered by the suggestion that they have other options, when you demonstrate through your lack of response that whether they choose you or someone else is entirely their decision, and you are completely comfortable either way, the avoidant is confronted with another failure of their control mechanisms. The jealousy that was supposed to make you fight for them does not materialize. The competition that was supposed to make you prove your interest does not engage you. You remain centered in your own worth, completely indifferent to their attempts to create anxiety about your position in their life. This indifference is devastating to the avoidant's sense of control, because it proves you are not invested in ways they can manipulate. You are not holding on to them desperately enough that the threat of losing them to someone else would make you compromise your boundaries or accept treatment that does not align with your standards. You are genuinely okay with them choosing someone else if that is what they prefer, which means the avoidant cannot use the threat of that choice to control your behavior or make you prove your worth by tolerating their patterns. The avoidant realizes that their value to you is conditional on their behavior, not inherent in their existence. You will engage with them if they show up consistently and authentically, but you will not fight to keep them if they are unavailable or if they create drama to test your attachment. This is the opposite of how the avoidant is used to relationships functioning, where their value is assumed and the other person's job is to accept whatever level of availability the avoidant offers while being grateful for the attention they receive. Your strength forces the avoidant to confront that. They would need to actually earn sustained connection through consistent presence, rather than being able to rely on your desperation or insecurity to keep you invested despite their withdrawal. This requirement for earning rather than assuming your investment is intolerable to the avoidant's defensive system, because it means they would have to be vulnerable, to show up when they feel like retreating, to risk rejection by pursuing rather than always being pursued. The attempt to create jealousy or competition fails completely with someone who is genuinely strong, because genuine strength does not require external validation or security that comes from being chosen over others. You know your worth independent of whether the avoidant chooses you, are completely comfortable with them pursuing other people if that is their preference. Do not need to win competition to feel valuable. This unshakable self-worth means the avoidant cannot manipulate you through threats of abandonment or replacement, cannot control the dynamic by making you prove you are worth choosing, cannot maintain power by keeping you anxious about your position in their life. Number 3, they become intermittently vulnerable to create confusion that makes you doubt your boundaries. When escalated withdrawal and attempts to create competition both fail to restore their control, many avoidants shift to a more insidious tactic, intermittent vulnerability that creates just enough hope that they are changing to make you question whether your boundaries are too rigid, whether you should give them another chance, whether the strength you are maintaining is actually pushing away someone who is genuinely trying. The avoidant shares something personal, has a moment of emotional openness, demonstrates brief capacity for the intimacy they normally avoid. This intermittent vulnerability is strategic rather than genuine transformation. The avoidant is not suddenly becoming emotionally available. They are deploying vulnerability as a tool to restore the dynamic where you are invested enough to tolerate their patterns. The vulnerability is carefully calibrated to be just enough to create hope without requiring sustained emotional presence, to suggest capacity for change without requiring actual behavioral transformation, to make you feel like you are finally seeing the real them, without them having to actually lower their defenses permanently. The goal is to create confusion that makes you doubt the boundaries you have established. If the avoidant can occasionally be vulnerable, maybe your requirements for consistent emotional availability are too demanding. If they can sometimes show up the way you need, maybe you should be more patient with the times they cannot. If they are trying, even inconsistently, maybe your strength is actually harshness that is preventing the relationship from developing naturally. The intermittent vulnerability is designed to make you question yourself, to soften the boundaries that have been protecting you from their patterns, to restore their position of being accommodated despite being unable to show up consistently. But when you do not respond to intermittent vulnerability by lowering your standards or accepting inconsistency as acceptable effort, when you maintain your boundaries even when the avoidant occasionally demonstrates capacity for intimacy, when you require sustained behavioral change rather than accepting brief moments of openness as sufficient evidence of transformation, the avoidant realizes this tactic has also failed. You are not confused by their occasional vulnerability. You recognize it as exactly what it is: a momentary lowering of defenses that will be followed by withdrawal the moment the vulnerability starts feeling too threatening. Your ability to hold boundaries even in the face of the avoidance vulnerability demonstrates a level of psychological clarity and strength that the avoidant cannot manipulate. You understand that occasional openness is not the same as consistent emotional availability, that intermittent effort is not evidence of genuine change, that showing you glimpses of who they could be is not the same as actually becoming that person through sustained work. Your strength allows you to appreciate the vulnerability when it happens, without using it as justification to accept the withdrawal that always follows. This refusal to be swayed by intermittent vulnerability forces the avoidant to confront that they cannot maintain access to you through strategic moments of openness that require no sustained transformation. You are requiring actual change, therapeutic work, consistent behavioral patterns, genuine emotional availability over time, rather than accepting promises or brief demonstrations of capacity as sufficient. The avoidant realizes they cannot have you while remaining exactly as defended as they are, cannot keep you engaged through occasional vulnerability that is immediately retracted when it starts feeling unsafe. The intermittent vulnerability tactic failing is particularly difficult for the avoidant because it was their attempt at compromise, trying to give you something without actually changing their fundamental patterns. When even this compromise fails to restore their control or make you accept the relationship on their terms, the avoidant is faced with the reality that you cannot be manipulated, cannot be convinced to accept less than you deserve, cannot be controlled through any of the tactics that have always worked to keep previous people invested, despite the avoidant's inability to show up consistently. Number 4. They frame your boundaries as cruelty to guilt you into accommodating their patterns. When all tactical attempts to restore control have failed, many avoidants resort to reframing your strength and boundaries as character flaws designed to make you feel guilty about maintaining standards that protect you from their dysfunction. They suggest that your boundaries are rigid, that your strength is actually coldness, that your refusal to accept their patterns is evidence that you do not really care about them or understand how difficult intimacy is for them. The avoidant attempts to make you the problem, to frame your healthy self-protection as the reason the relationship cannot work, to guilt you into lowering boundaries by suggesting that maintaining them is proof you are not compassionate or patient enough. This reframing is particularly insidious because it contains partial truth that makes it difficult to dismiss entirely. Maintaining boundaries does mean not accommodating their patterns. Requiring consistent behavior does mean not making endless allowances for their attachment wounds. Refusing to pursue when they withdraw does create distance that the avoidant experiences as rejection. The avoidant takes these truths and twists them into a narrative where you are the one preventing intimacy, where your standards are the barrier to connection, where your strength is the problem, rather than their inability to meet reasonable relationship expectations. The goal is to activate guilt and self-doubt that will make you question whether you are being fair, whether your boundaries are too harsh, whether you should be more understanding of how difficult emotional availability is for someone with their attachment history. The avoidant wants you to take responsibility for the relationship failing, to see yourself as the person whose rigidity is creating problems, to lower your standards while framing that lowering as you becoming more compassionate and less demanding. But when you do not accept this reframing, when you recognize that boundaries are not cruelty, and that requiring consistency is not unreasonable, when you refuse to take responsibility for the avoidant's inability to show up in ways that healthy relationship requires, the avoidant is forced to confront that they cannot guilt you into accepting their patterns. You understand that compassion does not mean accepting mistreatment, that patience has limits, that your boundaries are protecting your well-being rather than punishing them for their limitations. Your refusal to accept guilt for having standards demonstrates psychological maturity. The avoidant cannot manipulate. You know the difference between having healthy requirements and being unreasonably demanding, between protecting yourself and being unnecessarily harsh, between giving someone space to grow and enabling dysfunction that prevents growth. This clarity means the avoidant cannot make you doubt yourself, cannot convince you that you are the problem, cannot restore control by making you feel responsible for their inability to meet basic relationship expectations. What makes this particularly powerful is that you can maintain compassion for the avoidant struggles while still holding boundaries that protect you. You can understand that their attachment wounds make intimacy difficult while still requiring that they address those wounds, rather than expecting you to accommodate them indefinitely. You can have empathy for how scared they are while still refusing to enable their avoidance by accepting breadcrumbs of emotional availability as sufficient. Your strength includes both compassion and boundaries, which means the avoidant cannot use one against the other, cannot make you choose between understanding their limitations and protecting yourself from those limitations. The failure of this guilt-based manipulation forces the avoidant to confront that. You will not take responsibility for their patterns, will not accept being framed as the problem, when their inability to sustain intimacy is the actual issue, will not lower your standards because they have framed maintaining standards as lack of compassion. This is often the point where the avoidant either leaves entirely or has a genuine crisis that forces them to consider that maybe their patterns are the problem, rather than other people's expectations being too high. Number 5, they experience genuine panic as they realize they actually need you, but cannot control whether they keep you. Beneath all the tactical maneuvers and attempted manipulations lies a devastating realization that the avoidant cannot avoid once all their control mechanisms have failed. They actually need you in ways they have never needed anyone before. And your strength means they cannot ensure they keep you. The avoidant is confronted with the exact vulnerability their entire defensive system was built to prevent, needing someone who might not choose them, depending on someone who will not be manipulated into staying, wanting someone who requires them to show up in ways they are not certain they can sustain. This panic is different from the anxiety the avoidant usually experiences about intimacy. The usual anxiety is about closeness threatening their sense of self, about vulnerability making them feel exposed to rejection, about sustained presence feeling like suffocation. The panic that comes from realizing they need you but cannot control you is about facing that. They might lose something genuinely important because they cannot manipulate you into accepting their patterns, that your strength means the relationship exists only if they can actually show up consistently, that they have finally encountered someone they cannot afford to lose, but have no guarantee they can keep. The panic generates behaviors that look like the avoidant finally pursuing, finally demonstrating that you matter, finally showing the investment they were incapable of showing before. But these behaviors are still driven by the avoidant's need to restore control, rather than by genuine transformation. They are pursuing not because they have developed capacity for sustained intimacy, but because they are desperate to secure you before you completely disengage. They are demonstrating effort, not because they have done the work to make effort sustainable, but because they need to convince you to stay long enough for them to figure out how to restore the dynamic where they had power. When you recognize this panic-driven pursuit as distinct from genuine change, when you maintain boundaries even as the avoidant seems to finally be showing up, when you require evidence of sustained transformation rather than accepting temporary pursuit as proof they have become capable of relationship, the avoidant is forced to confront the full weight of what your strength means. They cannot have you on their terms. They cannot keep you through manipulation. They cannot ensure the relationship continues by deploying tactics that have always worked before. They have to actually change or accept losing you. And change is the one thing their entire psychology is organized to avoid. The panic intensifies as this reality settles because the avoidant is trapped between two unbearable options: do the genuine therapeutic work required to develop capacity for sustained intimacy, which requires confronting every wound and fear their defenses exist to protect against, or lose you and face that. They destroyed the one relationship where they actually felt seen and valued despite their patterns. Neither option is tolerable, which creates a psychological crisis the avoidant has no framework for managing. Some avoidants respond to this crisis by leaving before they can be left, choosing to end the relationship on their terms rather than risk experiencing the abandonment they panic about. Others freeze in the panic, unable to move toward you because intimacy terrifies them, and unable to leave because losing you is equally terrifying, becoming stuck in a suspended state where they can do nothing but watch the relationship deteriorate. Occasionally, an avoidant uses the panic as motivation to finally seek genuine help, to begin the therapeutic work they have avoided their entire life, to risk transformation, because the alternative of losing you has become more unbearable than the terror of genuine vulnerability. Your strength creates this crisis, not because you are trying to force the avoidant to change, but because you are simply refusing to enable their patterns. The panic they experience is not your responsibility to manage. It is the natural consequence of someone whose entire relational strategy depends on controlling others, encountering someone who cannot be controlled. What they do with the panic, whether they use it as catalyst for growth or confirmation that relationships are not worth the risk, is entirely up to them and completely outside your control. Number 6, they attempt to devalue you to restore the belief that you are not actually worth the effort intimacy requires. When panic becomes unbearable, and the avoidant realizes they cannot restore control through any of their usual mechanisms, a common defensive response is devaluation, attempting to diminish your worth in their own mind to make losing you feel less catastrophic, and to restore the belief that the problem is you not being good enough rather than them being incapable of intimacy. The avoidant begins finding faults, focusing on imperfections, reframing qualities they initially valued as actually being problematic or evidence that you are not the person they thought you were. This devaluation serves multiple psychological functions simultaneously. It reduces the panic about losing you by making you seem less valuable. It protects the avoidant's ego by framing the relationship ending as about your inadequacy rather than their inability to sustain intimacy. It justifies their withdrawal by creating narrative that you are not actually worth the work that showing up consistently would require. Most importantly, it allows the avoidant to leave while maintaining the belief that they are not running from vulnerability, but making the reasonable decision to not pursue someone who is flawed in ways that make them unsuitable. The devaluation often focuses specifically on your strength. The very quality that prevented them from controlling you becomes reframed as hardness, coldness, unwillingness to compromise, unreasonable rigidity. The boundaries that protected you from their patterns become evidence that you're not actually capable of real intimacy, that you are too defended yourself, that your strength is actually a matching dysfunction that makes you incompatible. The avoidant needs to believe that your boundaries are the problem rather than their patterns requiring those boundaries, that your strength is flaw, rather than the health they cannot match. But the devaluation is never entirely successful, because the avoidant knows beneath the defensive reframing that you are not actually flawed in the ways they are trying to convince themselves you are. Your strength is not coldness. It is self-worth they wish they had. Your boundaries are not rigidity. They are appropriate protection. They wish they could provide for themselves. Your requirements for consistency are not unreasonable demands. They are healthy standards they know they should be capable of meeting, but are too defended to actually meet. This knowing beneath the devaluation creates cognitive dissonance the avoidant cannot fully resolve. They need to believe you are not worth the effort to protect their ego and justify their withdrawal, but they simultaneously know you are exactly what they need, and that losing you is consequence of their own inability to show up rather than your inadequacy. The devaluation allows them to leave, but it does not allow them to feel good about leaving, does not fully protect them from the knowledge that they are destroying something valuable because they are too terrified to risk what genuine connection requires. Your strength means you are not affected by their devaluation attempts. You do not internalize their criticisms. Do not question your worth based on their need to diminish it. Do not allow their reframing of your qualities to make you doubt yourself. You understand that devaluation is defense mechanism rather than accurate assessment, that the avoidant attacking your character is evidence of their own internal crisis rather than truth about your flaws. This immunity to their devaluation is the final evidence that they cannot control you. They cannot even control how you see yourself, cannot make you doubt your worth, cannot convince you that you are the problem. The failure of devaluation to restore their control or successfully protect them from the pain of losing you is often the point where the avoidant leaves permanently. Unable to maintain the cognitive dissonance of knowing you are valuable while trying to convince themselves you are not. They take the coward's exit, framing the ending as about incompatibility or your flaws rather than acknowledging that they destroyed something good because they were too defended to receive it. And you, in your strength, let them go with the knowledge that their need to devalue you says everything about them and nothing about your actual worth. Number 7. They finally realize that genuine intimacy requires vulnerability they are not certain they can survive risking. The ultimate confrontation that happens when the avoidant encounters someone too strong to control is the realization that genuine intimacy, the kind of connection they have always claimed to want but could never sustain, requires vulnerability that might destroy them if it goes wrong. All their control mechanisms were designed to prevent ever having to risk this level of exposure, to ensure they could experience some version of connection without the terror of being truly known and potentially rejected. Your strength has removed every shield they used to protect against this terror, leaving them face to face with the fundamental choice their patterns have always allowed them to avoid: risk genuine vulnerability or accept permanent isolation. This realization is not intellectual understanding. The avoidant has always known on some level that their patterns prevent real intimacy. This is visceral confrontation with the actual cost of their defenses, forced awareness that the control they have always maintained has kept them from ever experiencing the connection their deepest self actually craves, devastating recognition that they are going to die alone if they cannot develop capacity to risk the vulnerability that genuine intimacy demands. And the terror of that vulnerability still feels like certain death, even as they recognize what refusing to risk it is costing them. Your strength has created conditions where the avoidant cannot maintain comfortable middle ground of pseudo-intimacy that requires no real vulnerability. With you, it is either genuine connection that demands consistent emotional availability and sustained presence, or complete disconnection. There is no option to keep you partially engaged while maintaining their defenses, no way to have some version of relationship that allows them to avoid the vulnerability real intimacy requires. You have forced a binary choice their defensive system was specifically designed to prevent ever having to make. The avoidant realizes that if they want you, they have to become someone capable of the intimacy you require, and they have never been capable of sustaining. This means therapeutic work addressing childhood wounds that formed their patterns. This means learning to sit with feelings they have suppressed their entire life. This means practicing vulnerability despite terror that makes vulnerability feel like walking toward certain destruction. This means risking being truly known and facing that the person who knows them completely might still choose to leave. What makes this realization so difficult is that the avoidant cannot guarantee the vulnerability will be worth it. They can do all the work, can transform their patterns, can develop capacity for sustained intimacy, and you might still not choose them because transformation does not erase the damage their patterns already caused or guarantee compatibility once they are capable of showing up. The avoidant is being asked to risk everything, to dismantle defenses that have kept them psychologically intact since childhood, to face every terror their nervous system declares will destroy them, without any promise that the risk will result in keeping you. This is where some avoidants finally break through their defenses and choose growth despite the terror. recognizing that the alternative is continuing patterns that will ensure they never experience the intimacy they actually need. They enter therapy, begin genuine work on their attachment wounds, start the slow process of learning to tolerate vulnerability despite nervous systems that scream it is dangerous. They do this work not with guarantee they will keep you, but with understanding that becoming capable of intimacy is necessary, whether you stay or leave, that their patterns require transformation for their own well-being, rather than just to secure a specific relationship. But most avoidants faced with this choice choose their defenses over the possibility of genuine connection. The terror of vulnerability feels more immediate and more certain than the loneliness of continued isolation. They leave, frame the ending as about incompatibility, find someone new who will accommodate their patterns and allow them to avoid this confrontation for a while longer. They die having never experienced real intimacy because real intimacy required risk they could never bring themselves to take. And your strength was the mirror that reflected this truth so clearly they could not continue denying it. What your strength actually accomplishes. Your strength in the face of the avoidance patterns does not fix them, does not make them suddenly capable of intimacy, does not guarantee they will do the work required for transformation. What your strength accomplishes is forcing them to confront the full cost of their defenses, showing them clearly that their control mechanisms are destroying their capacity for the connection they claim to want, creating crisis that makes continuing their patterns uncomfortable enough that change becomes possible, even if not guaranteed. Most importantly, your strength protects you from enabling dysfunction that would destroy you eventually if you allowed it to continue. By refusing to be controlled, by maintaining boundaries even when the avoidant deploys every tactic to restore their power, by requiring genuine transformation, rather than accepting the appearance of effort, you ensure that you do not sacrifice your well-being to accommodate someone else's refusal to address their wounds. Your strength is not about changing the avoidant. It is about protecting yourself while creating space for them to choose growth if they ever become capable of choosing it. The avoidant who encounters your strength will either rise to meet it by doing genuine work on their patterns, or they will leave seeking someone easier to control. Either outcome is acceptable, because both honor your worth and your requirement for relationship that does not demand your self-abandonment. The avoidant who stays and grows was always capable of growth. They just needed the confrontation your strength provided to finally begin. The avoidant who leaves was never going to transform regardless of how much you accommodated, and your strength saved you years of enabling dysfunction that would only worsen over time. You cannot control which choice the avoidant makes. You can only control whether you maintain the strength that forces them to make a choice at all, rather than continuing indefinitely in pseudo-relationship, where they get benefits of your presence without costs of genuine intimacy. Your strength is your greatest gift to yourself, and potentially to them. It ensures you protect your well-being while creating the only conditions under which genuine transformation becomes possible for someone whose entire psychology is organized around avoiding exactly that transformation. Why most people never develop this strength and what it costs them. Understanding why your strength is so destabilizing to the avoidant requires understanding why most people never develop it in the first place. The majority of people who encounter avoidant patterns respond by accommodating them, by making endless allowances for behavior that should be deal breakers, by accepting breadcrumbs while telling themselves it is enough. This accommodation is not weakness or lack of self-worth. It is the result of powerful psychological forces that make tolerating avoidance feel like the loving, patient, mature response. Society teaches that love means patience, that good partners are understanding of others' limitations, that walking away when things get difficult is selfish and immature. The person involved with an avoidant internalizes these messages and uses them to justify staying through patterns that are destroying them. They tell themselves they are being patient when they are actually enabling, that they are being understanding when they are actually sacrificing their own needs, that they are being mature when they are actually participating in dysfunction. The avoidant reinforces this by framing their patterns as temporary difficulties that patients will eventually resolve. They promise they will work on their issues, suggest they just need more time, imply that if the person would just be more understanding, the relationship would improve. These promises create hope that keeps the person invested while the avoidant continues operating exactly as they always have. The person waits for change that never comes, accommodates patterns that never improve, sacrifices their needs for a future intimacy that will never materialize. This cycle can continue for years, even decades. The person becomes so invested in the relationship that leaving feels impossible, despite the constant pain of being with someone emotionally unavailable. They have built their life around the avoidant, have made so many accommodations that reversing them feels overwhelming, have told so many people the relationship is fine that admitting it is destroying them feels humiliating. The sunk cost of years spent hoping the avoidant will change becomes the reason they cannot leave, even when it is clear the change will never happen. What this costs is devastating. The person loses years they could have spent in genuine partnership with someone capable of reciprocity. They lose their own sense of self as they continuously compromise their needs to accommodate the avoidance limitations. They lose the ability to recognize healthy relationship because they have normalized dysfunction for so long. They lose opportunities for real intimacy because they are emotionally bound to someone incapable of providing it. They lose their youth, their energy, their hope to a pattern that only ends when they finally develop the strength to enforce boundaries or when they die, having never experienced the love they deserved. Your strength means you avoided this fate. You recognized early enough that accommodation was enabling rather than supporting, that patience without progress is just accepting mistreatment, that love does not mean tolerating behavior that destroys your well-being. You developed the capacity to walk away from something that looked like love but functioned as slow psychological death. This strength is rare, precious, the result of either healthy modeling in childhood or hard-won self-knowledge that taught you your worth is not determined by whether someone with profound attachment wounds chooses you. How to maintain your strength. When every instinct tells you to soften. The avoidance escalating tactics, when they realize they cannot control you, will activate every instinct that makes people accommodate dysfunction. You will feel cruel maintaining boundaries when they seem to be trying. You will question whether your standards are too high when they demonstrate intermittent capacity for intimacy. You will wonder if you are giving up too soon when they appear to finally be pursuing. These feelings are not evidence that you should lower your boundaries. They are evidence that your compassion and desire for connection are being activated by someone whose patterns require you to suppress those very qualities to protect yourself. Maintaining strength requires understanding that compassion and boundaries are not opposing forces. They work together to ensure you can care about someone without being destroyed by their inability to care for you in return. You can have empathy for how difficult intimacy is for the avoidant, while still requiring that they address those difficulties, rather than expecting you to accommodate them indefinitely. You can want them to succeed in their growth, while refusing to participate in enabling that prevents the growth from ever happening. The key is distinguishing between genuine transformation and the appearance of effort. Genuine transformation includes sustained therapeutic work over months or years, not promises to start therapy someday. It includes consistent behavioral change that holds even when the avoidant feels anxious, not intermittent moments of vulnerability followed by the same withdrawal. It includes taking full responsibility for their patterns without blaming their limitations on attachment wounds they had no control over forming. It includes respecting your boundaries even when maintaining distance is difficult for them, not testing those boundaries constantly to see if you will bend. When you find yourself wanting to soften, remind yourself why the boundaries exist. They exist because the avoidance patterns were harming you. They exist because accommodation was enabling dysfunction rather than supporting growth. They exist because you deserve partnership that does not require your self-abandonment. They exist because love is not supposed to hurt this much, be this hard, require this much sacrifice of your own needs. The boundaries are not punishment. They are protection. And maintaining them is honoring yourself in ways the avoidant has never been capable of honoring you. You will doubt yourself. The avoidant will ensure you doubt yourself through their escalating tactics designed specifically to make you question your strength. But doubt is not the same as being wrong. You can doubt whether you are being fair while still maintaining boundaries that protect you. You can question whether your standards are reasonable while still requiring consistency that healthy relationship demands. You can feel uncertain while still trusting that the strength you are demonstrating is exactly what the situation requires, even if every instinct screams at you to accommodate, to give another chance, to believe this time will be different. Your strength is not about being perfect or never wavering. It is about maintaining boundaries even when maintaining them is the hardest thing you have ever done. Even when the avoidant deploys every tactic to make you bend, even when you question yourself constantly about whether you are doing the right thing. Strength is choosing your well-being over the possibility that accommodating dysfunction might somehow lead to the intimacy you deserve. Strength is walking away from someone you care about, because staying would mean accepting relationship that will never meet your needs, no matter how much you sacrifice to make it work. The gift. Your strength gives to future you. Years from now, you will look back on the moment you maintained your strength against the avoidant's attempts to control you and recognize it as the moment you saved yourself from a future of profound regret. You will see clearly that every boundary you held, every moment you refused to accommodate, every time you chose yourself over the possibility of making it work with someone incapable of showing up, was an act of self-love that protected you from decades of diminishment. You will recognize that the avoidant who left when they could not control you did you the greatest favor they were capable of doing. They removed themselves from your life before you wasted more years hoping they would transform into someone capable of genuine intimacy. You will see that the avoidant who stayed and did the work was worth the boundaries you held because the work proved they were capable of growth when properly motivated. Either way, your strength ensured the outcome honored your worth. You will understand that the temporary pain of maintaining boundaries was nothing compared to the permanent damage of allowing them to be violated. You will know that the loneliness of being alone was preferable to the far worse loneliness of being emotionally isolated while physically partnered with someone unavailable. You will appreciate that you chose possible solitude over guaranteed suffering, that you bet on yourself rather than on someone's potential to become different, that you loved yourself enough to require reciprocity rather than accepting one-sided devotion as good enough. Most importantly, you will recognize that your strength taught you what you are capable of, showed you that you can survive the loss of someone who mattered, proved that your worth is not dependent on whether someone with attachment wounds chooses you. This knowledge becomes the foundation of every relationship that follows. You will never again tolerate patterns that require your self-abandonment. You will never again mistake accommodation for love. You will never again accept breadcrumbs while telling yourself you are being patient. Your strength with this avoidant becomes the template for how you will allow yourself to be treated for the rest of your life, and that template will save you from patterns that destroy people who never developed the capacity to walk away from dysfunction no matter how much they care about the person creating it.